Welcome to Candid Leadership. Today, I have two phenomenal examples of what Veterans Day embodies. Both Erica Jeffries and Daphne Curtin are two friends of mine who adventured with me through the United States Military Academy 2 decades ago. It's fantastic to have two great examples of successful veterans on Candid Leadership today to share with us what Veterans Day means to them and also how they use the experience of being a veteran as they've transitioned into both the business and federal government. Welcome, Erica Jeffries and Daphne Curtin, to Candid Leadership. So today I have the great pleasure to have on this phenomenal podcast, and thank you for listening, Daphne Curtin. And a longtime friend of mine, over 2 decades we've known each other, and I have had the pure and utter joy of watching her transform as a leader from the hallowed days at West Point, moving on to her Army career that was just wonderful as a military police officer. And then as she made that really tough transition to the civilian market where she absolutely rocked it. And I've kind of continued to leech off of these phenomenal lessons that she's taught me. So Daphne, great to have you here with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's great to talk to you today.
So I do want to kind of start way back at the beginning where I was just really lucky to see you and the many different things and the multitude of leadership lessons that we learned together in kind of our fundamental development at West Point. And one of the biggest lessons that you taught me as a peer, and I think that's so important that we recognize you can learn leadership lessons from your peers, and quite often, sometimes they're the most important ones. We went through kind of a harrowing event our senior year, first year, and there was some contention in both of our jobs, and we both had to kind of tone down a very unfortunate event that had happened. And you had a lot of patience with that, and I tend to be a bit more of a firecracker. And you took the long view. And so I really appreciated learning from another peer that sometimes just taking a deep breath, stepping back from what may be a really bad public gaffe that someone else did, you can learn lessons from that. So thank you for that lesson, Daph.
Of course, absolutely.
All right. Let's start by just talking about some of the lessons that you've learned with respect to leadership, both in the military and then during your transition.
Yeah, so I think one of the things, I go back to our days of West Point, and you all come in from, being very accomplished individuals in your respective hometowns, just really taking that pivot and learning how to be a follower again. And if you think about how the fortune of being in really great companies and having a really great education, to include my postgraduate education, and I've realized that we really don't talk about followership, except really in the military. We talk about leadership quite a bit. And one of the things when I coach people, I always say, no matter what level you're at in an organization, learn to follow first, and then you can learn how to lead. But if you try to start with leadership without learning those lessons and learning that humility, I think it's really difficult. And I've given that counsel to peers as well as leaders senior to me. And I think it's something that's really hit home because you don't really think about it. How often do you really hear people talk about followership? It's just really not something that we talk about. And I think it's just so important. And the Army military really teaches you that.
I think that's a great point when you bring that forward. I had asked about that a couple of years ago, and I said there used to be a lot of writing really back in the 1970s on followership, but we just haven't seen that lately. And the way you describe it is really important because you talk about humility. And why would you bring that up when you're talking to some of your new employees?
I think back to when I was transitioning out of the military, and last 3 years I've been a personnel officer. So I've been in both a battalion S1, about 500 soldiers, and then finishing up as a brigade S1 with about 2,100 soldiers. And so I thought, hey, I'm 27, I've had this experience, I can just go jump and be a very senior position in the civilian sector. And I applied for all of these roles and didn't hear from anyone. And I just thought, what's going on? I don't get it. Until I realized I wasn't ready for those roles. People had done their pathway in the civilian sector to get those different experiences that got them to the level I would say I'm at today. And so that's why I say, no matter what your experience is, you've got to be humble because there's always something to learn. No matter where you're at in your career, there's always more learning. And it's important. I've transitioned from manufacturing company to an e-commerce company. There's a lot of things to learn. I didn't know everything. I still learn. I had some one-on-ones with leaders last week where I learned new things. And I think that's what's really important. You've got to be humble and realize that you don't know everything and just keep teaching yourself and learning and having that humility throughout.
That's awesome. And I want to hearken on that point. We've talked in the past about the importance of lateral movements in organizations. And you brought a great point, and many people transitioning from the military, and I would say anyone transitioning from one sector to another, oftentimes we overassess the knowledge that we have and we underassess the learning curve that we're about to face. One big important part about that, and we've talked about that, is the importance of being in operations. And just in my own history, I know I am a much better intelligence officer right now in the military than I ever would have been because I had so much experience in operational units. And so, how does that correlate to what you have done with respect to business?
Really great story. So, as I said, I ended up my career in personnel as a personnel officer, loved it, really knew that my passion was HR. And my first corporate role post the military, I interviewed with the vice president of human resources and mostly HR professionals and said, "Hey, I really want to come onto the HR team." And he pulled me aside and said, "Look, you've got a really strong operational background from your military experience. You would really benefit to be an operator in our business." And so I literally became a team leader, a production team leader on the manufacturing floor, and so learned everything about that business from the raw materials coming in one side of the plant to my team who was assembling those materials and pushing them, for delivery to our customers. I did that for about 18 months and then I transitioned back into HR. And then once I got into HR, because I'd spent so much time in operations, when I was supporting our finance team, I knew why there were issues if we weren't hitting our numbers because I was still walking the floor. I still knew, oh, hey, did you guys know this shipment was late? Or did you know we had this logistics issue? And it gave me that end to end view. And when I then went back to graduate school, I made this conscious decision that after my MBA, I was going to spend 5 years doing roles that were non HR roles. Because again, using that vice president's coaching to me, learn the business. So I did roles in procurement, I did a role in business development, I did a role in new product commercialization, I did a role in supply chain. And after 5 years, I went back into HR. And now, when I look at the role that I have now, where I'm passionate and what I bring, I feel to the table is that business view as I approach different human capital issues. And I think this thing gives me a different perspective. And, I would say a little bit very well rounded perspective. Not to say it's better, it's just different. And for me, in the way that I operate, and again, I go back to being a platoon leader and really understanding, the basics of that role. I think this was really good counsel for me. And so, yeah, I've made a lot of lateral moves, but I've made the lateral moves that have developed me into the leader I am today with just the breadth of knowledge that I have across multiple industries and multiple functions.
And I think that's really important that you kind of talk about the whole person development. I'm listening to you right now and I'm trying to keep pace of like my mind's just blown at the different types of jobs that you've had. And I'm sure that really helps as you kind of look at development and the way that you can kind of, because you've had such a broad experience, right? And we talk about this specifically in the military with respect to broadening, why it's important. It's encouraging that you hear that also in the business world. But how do you use that with respect to development?
So I think with development, so for me specifically, I had a really good counsel, probably 5, 6 years ago with one of my leaders who was just really passionate about the topic. And she said to me, look, do like an interest inventory. What are the things, and no matter what role you've had, what are you passionate about? And I would tell anyone to do that because the same things come up, right? I'm a person that loves to take things that are not operational and get them operational. Some people are the good to great people, right? As an example, find those trends that you really gravitate toward, because no matter what you do, if I think about when I was in procurement versus what I do now, the same types of things, types of activities are the things that get me excited, and then use that. The other thing that I would say, and I'm a big proponent of, is Strengths Finder. If people are familiar with that application, it's great because it tells you about who you are. And what I love about that philosophy is focus on what you're great at and mitigate what you're weak at. So, for me, I know how I operate. I know I can quickly see, A to Z, but sometimes that might mean I need to bring people along for the journey. And so then I find peers that are better at helping me fill in those details because I can just see it, right? That's helped me with the development piece as well. I think the other thing that I would say about development is I'm a big believer in having like a 5-year plan and looking at, okay, what do I want to do? And what are the skills that I need to have in my toolkit? But at the end of the day, you've got to own your development plan. When employees come to me and say, hey, what do you think? What should I do? I don't know what you should do. I can give you ideas. I can give you suggestions. I can tell you where I see your strengths are, maybe areas of opportunity. But ultimately, you've got to know what you're really passionate about. And that's why I say really focus on your interests. Because the other thing is, think about industries. The organization I'm with now wasn't founded when I was a kid growing up. And there's so many companies like that where they just weren't around. So again, think about what really you're passionate about. And roles are being created all the time as well. So I think in short, that's what I would say is really important.
That's awesome. And I've actually, listeners, I've had the fortunate opportunity to have this great conversation with Daphne over the years. So she's turned me on to Strength Finders. I've used that with a lot of mentees, and I write about it quite often too. And it's a really big part of understanding why I love collaborating with other people and making connections between people. I don't have the genius that Daphne does in certain ways to see things from A to Z, but I have the zest and zeal, I realized. And then I also have the ability to kind of see, oh, I know this person knows this person, 4 people down, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, evidently. I can try and make those connections and it works. And I've seen it work. And so I play to that strength. We just finished talking about strengths. And Daphne, you brought up some great points. But as we're looking at some of the transitioning service members that listen to this, sometimes we do overeat that spoonful of humility, and we don't necessarily always recognize that something we don't think we really know that much about are actually there are great strengths. You've talked to me about that in the past. Would you like to share that now?
Yeah, absolutely. Regardless of what level you were when you were transitioning out of the military, I just think about all the accountability that we have that just baked into our everyday. You think about a formation, you're there on time, you're checking, your soldier's uniform before you go out on a road march or on a mission. You have an operations order, so you're really planning every step and everyone understands what happens if things go awry, what the ultimate objective is, and that just commonplace. To move, you do a safety briefing and a safety assessment. I wouldn't say that's having those plans are necessarily part of the day in and day out, just coming to people naturally in business. Some organizations are more structured than others. It really depends. But what I would encourage you to do is think about those things that you weren't doing before you joined the military, but now are just part of your normal daily op tempo, where you are going to bring that rigor and that accountability and that structure to a business. It just, again, you mentioned, one of my strengths is being strategic. And yes, I can see A to Z, but I often think, even though I did have a lot of that naturally, even as a kid, I fine tuned it in the military because I always was having to have plans and contingency plans in case those plans went awry. So again, think of all those things that might seem very simple, um, but aren't.
And that is tying me into the next topic that we have always spoken about, and that's really about networking. You just lightly hearkened it there, why it's so important. Because think about it, the roles in the next decade, and especially those of us who are parents and are looking forward to, hey, what area do I want to push my kid in college? I think just their next job, those starter jobs for them, brand new people coming into the workforce, it would be hard for us to say the next 5, 10 year plan because those jobs might not even exist in our mind. We may all have self-driving cars by then. I hope to hear this and smile and say, God, I knew back then my car would never have to get fueled and always receive an electric charge and drive itself. Who knows? But I do know that those people that network and that can be a part of that job creation is so important. Talk to us a little bit about that with respect to networking, Daph.
I mean, one thing that you do a great job of is you're such a giver to others. And I think that's really the key thing. It's go into every relationship or interaction in the what can I give versus what I can get. I'll give you a great example. So I had a neighbor in Chicago, and we would be in the gym in the mornings together, running side by side on the treadmill, and just would talk. Really had no idea, what he what he did. We just kind of talked about whatever was on the news. Come to find out, he was an HR recruiter and helped me land my role in my current organization. And I just ended up talking to him last week, 5 years going on, and now I'm looking to fill some roles in my organization. And he just said, hey, here's to help you out. And oh, I'd love to connect you with a couple people as you think about your development. And again, that's just a random thing, but it was about giving. And so even just something very simple, and I'm not sure when I started this, but even when I'm interacting with my internal stakeholders or clients, I always try to, in my conversation, even if it's just a one-on-one, like, how can I help you? What do you need from me? And that leaves it open ended. And more often than not, people do need the help. And I know it sounds like a really small thing, but how often are people asking, are willing to help you on a daily basis? So I would suggest, if you think about it, it's a very easy thing to do. Even with your manager, hey, I know you got a lot going on. Anything I can do to help? And I think also just puts you in a really positive mindset, if nothing else. And so that's another counsel I would say. Be the person. What do you want to be known for? And I want to be known as a person that is always there to help and help my organization. And then when you go back to the original question of networking, I love it because I love helping other people. That's how I look at it. How can I help two people that I really like get connected and help them advance with whatever they're doing? That's what I find to be very, very rewarding. And I think if you go in with that mindset, you're always going to be successful.
That's absolutely the truth. And, psychologically, you get a little bit of a jolt of positive psychology if you are constantly asking to help others. And little do they know they're indebted to you. And this is the transactional nature that I kind of tongue in cheek laugh about. But psychologically, once you do a favor for someone, they see that, hey, I need to return the favor. It's just the way we're wired, human nature. But use it to your advantage. And this, of course, is not being transactional give and take, but it's more the fact that when you have a giving spirit and you give to others and help other people, it's just the way we want to be able to help and give back. And that really harkens into something we've talked about at length, Daphne, and that's the idea of servant leadership. You've embodied that in any job that you've had. And, it's fun to sit from afar and see. This was a word used quite often in the military, but I didn't read about it as much in kind of business literature, more so in clerical type work. When we've talked about it, how you can apply this in a business sector, and how would you kind of explain this or hearken this to people that are maybe in their first or second leadership job and why it's important?
I mean, I go back to very simple, being a platoon leader and always being at the back of the chow line. That's the image that always is in my mind. Like, make sure you take care of your soldiers, you take care of your people, you let them eat first. And that just really has always stuck with me as a concept. And so I think when you're in your first leadership job, what are you doing for your team? How are you helping your team grow? When I am interviewing people, often I ask, okay, what are you trying to get out of this role? You want to come here, that's great. What are you trying to learn? What are you trying to get? Because maybe it's something this role isn't going to give you, or maybe it is. But I'm always thinking about, look, I would want someone to treat me the same way. So I really think about leadership in that respect of how do we help the individual win? How do I help the team win? How do I help the organization win? Because that's what I'm passionate about. That's what I want to see. You can't win on your own. I remember the book, and you probably remember it too, that we got when we were lieutenants. It's called Company Command, that red book with the captain's bars on the front cover. That book was just so many lessons in that book I still follow. And a lot of it is just take care of your soldiers, just translates in the corporate world, take care of your people. And if that means you've got one direct report, then spend your time developing that one direct report or those two directs. And then as you grow up and now you're a manager of managers or you're managers of multiple business units, hopefully you set that tone wherever as you've grown throughout the organization so that you can do that at a much brighter scale. And, I always look at who are the people that I've invested time in. I want to see them be successful. Some people will be like, oh, I'm threatened. I want A players. I want people that are better than me, as good as me, or better than me to bring me up. I think you also have to really think about that when you're thinking about leadership.
That's awesome. That is a fantastic point. And I really like the fact that you talk about surround yourself with people that are not just as good, even better, because it brings up your game. And you've already spoken about why it's important to know their strengths. The diversity in a team that has different strengths and they're coming at it from different angles, man, your end product always ends up so much better. If it's not ducks, pick ducks, pick ducks. And I think you're just spot on with that point. Daphne, you brought up a really good point about development plans and why they're so important. What are those things that you really see in a development plan that either make it stick or make it work? Because I just see so many out there that great intentions, but the follow through just isn't there.
So I think the key thing is really understand what you want. And when you go into that mentor relationship with the person that's going to work with you on the plan, the resume is not what I want to see. What I want to understand is, where do your interests lie? And that doesn't necessarily mean I'm interested in HR. Well, what part of HR are you interested in? Do you want to really focus on recruiting? Do you really want to focus on partnering with the business? Or do you want to be behind the scenes, as an example, or just themes that you've had in your past? Because again, I think people tend to kind of like the same things regardless of the assignment you're in. What's your style? I think that's important, to know yourself. I mean, so much of your development plan, in my mind, is just really knowing yourself and who you are. That's why I talk about strengths. I know what I am. I know what my strengths are, and that really helps me. And then also, what are those skills you have? So those hard coded skills that you definitely have, that you've gained over your experiences. So if I know someone comes to me and they say, look, every job I do, these are the things I love doing. These are like my hard skills. And this is kind of who I am as a person. I can take that and I can help you see why this role might be a better fit for you versus another role. Just when someone says, well, I want to be fill in the blank, high level position, that doesn't do, well, why? What's your motivation? I think about myself and my career, and I think everyone's got their own basis of what drives them. You know, what I always say is, I've always wanted to be in a position that allows me to drive and impact the biggest change. So, you know, more of a junior level in my career, I could do that with my direct reports. But as I've grown in my organizations, I have the ability to really shape how we do different things and really have a bigger impact, because, you know, now I'm coaching people that are my level or higher, who can drive different changes as well. So again, where do you want to play? What are your strengths? What your brand is? What you're passionate about? That's what makes a plan helpful. And then the other thing I would say is, what I do every quarter is I go back to my plan and I go back to my strengths, and I'm like, okay, am I firing on everything? And if I'm not firing on something, and what I mean by that, I'm like, do I feel like a lull in my work? Do I feel like a lull in my energy? Usually it's because I'm not doing something that I have a ton of time in putting into a plan. And that's when I reach out to talk to, you know, I call it my board of advisors, the folks that know me well, I trust, and I can say, okay, where am I? Here's what I'm struggling with. And 9 times out of 10, it's a 5-minute conversation with someone that I really trust. You can say, oh, here's exactly maybe that's not what's happening. So again, I would go back to, know what you're interested in, know what your style is, know what your skills are, because you have to give that mentor, especially if they don't know you well, something to work with to really help advise you.
I love the comment you made on board of advisors. And that harkens back to me just drumbeating both mentorship and sponsorship, why it's so important. You don't have to do it all the time, 100%, have these really elaborate, detailed plans. Just do it. Just jump in there, talk to people, understand how you can open doors. And mentors don't have to be older than you, they could actually be younger than you. We're seeing it all the time now with younger mentors. I get a ton of great information for those of you who are out in the space right now with respect to podcasting. I listen to a ton of younger mentors who talk about why this is so important and how you drive change. Driving change is something you have absolutely done your entire career, Daphne, and it has been phenomenal watching you flourish. I am very pleased to have had and shared this time with you today. Just any more shout outs you have for our listeners out there.
I think the last point you made about mentorship and lots of different people makes, you know, tons of sense. Even I was preparing to talk to you today, I went to my comms partner, who is younger than me, to talk to her to say, hey, how would you think about this? What should I do? So, you know, again, that goes back to the earlier point we talked about with humility. You know, realize there are people that are, but you can't be good at everything. So go
Yes,
surround yourself
that's
by the
right.
people that are the best. Go to those folks and tap into them. People want to help. People are inherently, inherently good and want to help you. So go out and really tap into that, because it's, again, what are you giving, and then, getting in return. I just think it's so important, and you're helping people along the way in every interaction.
And people always want to show their best selves. And I think you have helped us open that door today to really kind of look at not only the concepts of give and take and that seminal work that, many of you have read, Adam Grant's book, but also the fact of that dose of humility and realizing that people and their strengths are what will help you achieve success. Daphne Curtin, thank you so much for sharing your time and your talents with us today. We wish you all the best in all your future endeavors, and we're very appreciative here on Candid Leadership that you took time out to share your leadership lessons.